Welcome back to the show. Now, Mitt Romney, the lead Republican candidate in the nomination race, has won New Hampshire, beating Ron Paul as well as John Huntsman in what was not exactly the closest run thing, but as was expected. Now, to discuss that New Hampshire primary, indeed, what is the outlook for the rest of the nomination for that Republican Party, we're joined by Tom Switzer from the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Of course, my guest host today, Patrick Noble from Zurich Investments. Tom, look, I might say thanks very much for coming in. Look, he largely expected to win, Mitt Romney. I believe he's well known there. He is a home, I believe, in a neighbouring state. So how significant a win for him?
Look, it's very significant, historically speaking, because it's very rare for a presidential candidate, unless of course you're the president, to win back-to-back primaries and caucuses, Iowa and New Hampshire. So he's done this the first time since 1976. It's a very impressive effort. And I think that all the available public opinion evidence indicates that he stands a very good chance of winning South Carolina, something that many pundits ruled out only a few weeks ago. So he's looking very good, and it's largely because the Conservative alternatives are all eating each other up, and so that's created an opportunity for him to come through.
I want to get to South Carolina in a moment, but what about the margin of the win for Mitt Romney? It was interesting, Newt Gingrich beforehand coming out and saying, look, unless he gets a 40% margin win, then it's going to be a bad result for him. I mean, he would say that, but he didn't quite get that 40%, very close to it. I mean, is the momentum still very much with him?
I do, and I think one of the reasons why it is, James, is because the Conservatives are all over the place. Their vote is fractured. If they could somehow coalesce around one candidate and amalgamate all of these votes, then they'd probably have a much better chance of knocking off Romney. But, you know, the Republican Party is very much splintered at the moment. There are two candidates. There's Mitt Romney and anybody but Romney.
How is that sort of playing itself out? As you say, there doesn't seem to be any sort of core ideology with the Republican Party at the moment. You have like the libertarian, if you like, Ron Paul versus I suppose the social conservative, if you like, in Santorum, who didn't fare particularly well. And as you say, very much a moderate Mitt Romney. I mean, is he just almost a leader and winner by default?
Yeah, well, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is arguably the most, conservative, pro-growth, pro-reform editorial page in the States, they rate Romney as the candidate with the least impeccable economic credentials. And it's largely because they see him as very cautious, measured, conservative instead of a sort of pro-growth, bold reformer. And what the Republican base, which is so important in these primaries, what they want is a candidate who's not only going to make the case for economic growth, which has been very sluggish during the Obama years, but they want a candidate to restrain and reform government so that it doesn't bankrupt the country.
I was reading a fascinating article just in the lead up to the New Hampshire primary, quoting saying, those expecting Romney to be a philosophic leader will be disappointed. He's a management consultant and a very good one. Yeah,
I think that's right. And he, in a way, prides himself on being really the only prominent businessman in the field who's created a lot of jobs. He's been under a lot of attack in the last few days for some silly comments he's made about, firing people and whatnot. But the point is, Bain Capital was a successful company. By all accounts, it did create a lot of jobs and wealth net-wise.
They can't seem to make any of the barbs stick, though, can they? I mean, there was the gaffe he made about supposedly enjoying firing people or something along those lines. Yeah. He's made a couple of sort of the $10,000 bet and so forth, but none of it seems to stick.
Well, I think one of the reasons why that particular gaffe did not really hurt him in the Republican primaries is because the other candidates, like Newt Gingrich most notably, are attacking him from the left. They almost sound like Michael Moore, which doesn't make any sense at all in a Republican primary. And I think that voters are generally pretty wise up to that, and they recognise that for all of Romney's flaws, that's not one of his weaknesses.
Patrick, from a market perspective, do you just basically want to hear the economic philosophy, the economic sort of outlook? What is the plan for trying to turn around or at least sustain what recovery they are seeing at the moment?
Well, I think that's interesting because one of the things from the market last year, obviously, was when we had this debt ceiling debate. We got to this critical juncture in the market. Everyone thought that the politicians on either side of the fence could come together and make an 11th hour deal. That fell through. The US got downgraded. And we did see a little bit of quite a significant rupture in global equity markets around that event. We have since then seen the Super Committee again has been unable to come to some agreements in terms of cost cutting and so forth. So I was wondering, on the theoretical chance that Romney became, or whoever in the Republican Party became the candidate and then eventually became president, what would that actually mean in terms of how the United States economy would be run? Would we actually see significant cost cutting and running our government, or would we see maybe a little bit of a shift in terms of...
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, a lot would also have to come from Congress, and the Republicans do have control of the House of Representatives, but they don't have the Senate. They need another 2 to 3 votes before they can get control of the Senate. Most pundits and seasoned observers in Washington think the Republicans will gain the Senate, albeit just. So if the Republicans have control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, then they would have a very good chance of making those kind of reforms, including shutting down the government brokers such as Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae that many Conservatives blame for the subprime mortgage crisis. But bear in mind, during the first 4 to 6 years of the Bush administration, the Republicans controlled both the House, the Senate and the White House, and the debt kept rising, and there was nothing done really to reform government.
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
So does that mean that the Tea Partiers that sit amongst that group have quite an influential, I suppose, role to play?
Yeah, I think they do in many respects, although in many respects they're seen as damaged goods because they keep backing candidates such as Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry, who are obviously not going to win the nomination, and many of their outspoken supporters are incapable of understatement. But at the same time, they are tapping into this widespread sense of political estrangement, economic anxiety around America, and they are raising this important issue about government debt. It wasn't until the Tea Party came on the show in 2009, 2010 that legislators on both sides of Congress started taking the issue seriously. Yeah.
What about moving forward? You mentioned South Carolina, Mitt Romney, obviously with the momentum. Ron Paul still hanging in there. He came second in the New Hampshire primary. We had Rick Perry seems to have fallen off quite considerably, and Santorum did so well in Iowa. Also got pretty hammered, I would have thought, today. I mean, is there a chance we could see people fall off, and can Ron Paul continue to stay in there?
Well, he will, but he won't be the nominee, and he won't be the nominee for this simple reason. He's got a good base of supporters. The floor is pretty sound, but the ceiling is low. In politics, you always need to reach out and develop coalitions, and he's too antagonistic and he's too ideological and rigid on these issues. Basically, he wants to just slash the size of government, which is actually an admirable thing in the current environment, but he also wants to shut down 5 departments, shut down the Federal Reserve, get the American dollar back on the gold standard, and he almost wants an isolationist foreign policy, which does seem odd even in after the death of bin Laden. There's still a case for America playing an interventionist role throughout parts of Asia and Europe. With NATO and whatnot, he wants to shut down NATO. He wants to pull out all of the 70,000 troops from Asia. This would help reduce the debt in the sense of shut down the Pentagon almost, but it's almost unrealistic.
Then who poses, in your opinion, the biggest challenge for the nomination?
Well, I think Romney looks like he will win it, particularly if he wins South Carolina and Florida later this month. But look, there is one chance that someone might come in very late. That seems highly unlikely, but it's not inconceivable.
Donald Trump?
Well, I think he's damaged goods after the whole birther nonsense, with President Obama. But the other candidate to not rule out completely is, believe it or not, Newt Gingrich. Romney himself is worried about Gingrich because he knows that Gingrich is highly intelligent, he's a great debater, he can rally the troops, and despite his temperamental lapses, he is a larger-than-life figure. And if the Conservatives can somehow coalesce around him, then he would have a formidable challenge. But the problem that Gingrich lacks is that he doesn't have a very good organisation, he doesn't have much money, and he's also got all this dirty laundry that's been revealed in the course of the last few months.
And look, Tom, just finally, obviously the Democrats would be sitting back watching all of this. Obama thinking, what would his thoughts be? I mean, who does he not want to face in a presidential election?
He doesn't want to face Romney because, again, all the evidence in public polling shows that Romney is more likely to win over the crucial independents in the battleground states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, Colorado, Indiana, the states that Obama won in 2008. He's not looking good there with those independents. Romney can win them over. Having said that, though, Obama will relish the opportunity to paint Romney as a Gordon Gekko, and he'll make it a class warfare election, and that'll be the game plan, I think, throughout the second half of the year.
And just quickly, do either of them have the everyday American touch, the like of a Bill Clinton? I mean, it doesn't seem Professor Obama or Mitt Romney, the former hedge fund manager, have that ability to connect.
I think that's a very fair point, and I don't think anyone's really made it, but I think you're right. I don't think that any of the presidential candidates on the Republican side, and certainly President Obama, had the Clinton touch. But bear in mind, Clinton was quite an extraordinary character in more ways than one.
Tom Switzer, great to have you on. It's turning out to be a fascinating race.
No worries. Thanks, James.